when I take a history with a patient, I am looking at their mother's health when their mother was either before they got pregnant or when they were pregnant or after delivery, because all those things set the stage for your immune system. And then, there are these other triggers that occur that then kind of bring it out. So if you have a history and you're thinking, people are listening and are thinking about their childhood, they're thinking about things that happened, if they think about weird things that no one could figure out, like maybe they had allergies that were not figured out. Maybe they have this, swelling in different parts of their body and they don't know why, or they have these various symptoms and, let's say they have anxiety and no one can really, really understand them, then it's worth understanding whether the immune system, and particularly the mast cells in the immune system, are really like the driver of that.
Welcome back to Reconditioned with me, Lauren Vackney, and thank you for being here again. If you are a seasoned listener, if you are a newbie, welcome. If you've come here because you are following Dr. Dempsey and you've come listening to that, or perhaps you've just Googled mast cell activation and you found this, welcome. This is a one-stop shop for all things holistic healing and living and inner growth, and one-stop shop for just all things you becoming your true whole self. So mast cell activation has been something I've been researching for a while because it was a real aha missing piece moment for me. And it's interesting because I've been on this journey, since healing from the arthritis I'd had since childhood, since infancy, really. This has been a 20-year journey of healing, and I've obviously been in remission for nearly 12 years, and yet there will always be new things that come up and that I become aware of. And that's really interesting to me because it shows me that the journey is never done. It's never over. There are always more things. We should always be in the pursuit of knowledge. That doesn't mean we need to constantly be in this doing mentality the whole time. We need some being as well. But the idea is you're never going to have all the answers. There's always going to be something else that comes up that you need to figure out that there's a missing piece for. And I think that's part of the journey. And I think when we think kind of it's over, I'm healed, it's never the case. Not to say that, we can't just rest and I guess just chill in that place of feeling well. We should. But the idea is that if you have another symptom and you're feeling unwell, or something's cropped up, whether it is mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, there is always something underlying and there's always another answer for it. And in the pursuit of that, the journey towards finding those solutions is where you grow and is where you heal. It's not necessarily the solutions, but the journey to finding them. That's what I found in, 23 years now of taking the baton from my mum, as it were, and going on this healing journey to find the answers myself. So this episode is super insightful. I got in touch with Dr. Dempsey because mast cell activation is a huge topic at the moment, but it has been for me since I figured out the connection for me personally between inflammation, autoimmunity, and histamine. Unexplained allergies, unexplained symptoms. So many people suffering with mast cell activation have unexplained symptoms that they just can't figure out. They're like, I just can't get rid of this UTI. I just can't seem to figure out these migraines. I just can't seem to figure out this anxiety, this depression, this IBS, this, recurring symptoms of autoimmunity. Often it is mast cell activation. It's not even an autoimmune disease. It's often not the Hashimoto's or the Crohn's or the lupus or, the CFS or whatever it is you're being diagnosed with. So just fascinating. So we go into it here in what mast cell activation is, how it presents itself, why it's triggered in the first place, what comes first, the mast cell activation or the autoimmunity or the propensity to autoimmunity. We go into Lyme, we go into treatments for mast cell and for Lyme, and it's just a really insightful. If you're interested in any way in health and you have ever had any unexplained symptoms or even symptoms that you think are explained, I would highly recommend you listen to this whole episode from beginning to end. So as usual, thank you for being here. I appreciate you. Some of you may remember that towards the end of 2024, I had a bit of an inflammatory flare-up. Now, having been in remission for so long, it was quite challenging. And even with all my tools and the best practitioners at my fingertips, it wasn't shifting. And there were many reasons for that, but a friend told me about the energy enhancement system that has taken off like crazy in the States, but it had just opened in the UK. And I really was trying everything I could to heal, so I went to check it out. Honestly, safe to say, I've never looked back. And if you're suffering with anything from autoimmune conditions to mental health challenges to cancer, even if your pet is unwell, please stick with me for 60 seconds while I tell you what this incredible system of healing is. So EES creates special energy fields using scalar waves and biophotons that allow your body to return to a place of homeostasis and balance, because that's the frequency our bodies should be vibrating at when in a state of wholeness. These fields help to balance and optimize your body's natural processes, promoting healing and overall well-being. I've personally now had 2 daytime sessions and have also stayed overnight twice, giving my body 11 hours of recharging within the scalar waves. And all I can say, and my friends who I sent say the same, is I've never fallen into a deeper meditation or a more relaxed state than when I'm in there, showing me that it's absolutely doing something with my energy field, thereby promoting wellness. The energy enhancement system promotes the body's ability to detox, reduce inflammation, reduce pain, improve circulation, improve sleep quality, improve immune function. It regenerates cells and it balances the right and left hemispheres of the brain, which is why we go into such deep meditation when we're in there. And that's just the beginning. Guys, the body is designed to heal from everything and anything. And when it's synchronizing with the healthy, energetic environment generated by the system, it can. They're based in London. I cannot recommend it enough. And you can get 18% off any length session by using code Reconditioned18 when booking. That's Reconditioned18. Just visit www.energyenhancementcentre.co.uk to book, or you can head to the show notes for all the links. I cannot wait to hear your success stories. And please note, EES do not make any medical claims. Dr. Tania Dempsey is a world-renowned expert in complex multi-system diseases. As the founder of the AIM Center for Personalized Medicine in New York, Dr. Dempsey uses functional and integrative medicine to get the patient's root cause of illness and to help them find a path to optimum health. Her extensive knowledge and experience with Mast Cell Activation Syndrome, mold, and Lyme and other vector-borne diseases has propelled her to the forefront of the medical community as a recognized and trusted speaker, researcher, advocate, and physician. Dr. Dempsey is board certified in internal medicine and integrative and holistic medicine. She received her MD degree from the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and her BS degree from Cornell University. She completed her internal medicine residency at NYU Medical Center. She was recently elected to the board of directors of International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. She is also a member of the USME CFS Clinician Coalition with the American Academy of Ozonotherapy and International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. She's an accomplished international speaker, writer, and thought leader, and has 8 peer-reviewed articles in the medical literature. Her latest endeavor is co-hosting the new podcast, Mast Cell Matters. So, Dr. Dempsey, I don't think that anyone will be under any illusion that you are absolutely the authority on the subject of mast cell activation. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here. This is a subject I wanted to speak about on the podcast for a while, and I was waiting specifically to speak to you about it. So,
Thank you.
obviously, before we get into it, I'm always asking the same question to all my guests. What have you done so far today to support your wellness?
So I try to get some movement in whenever I can. Today, sometimes I have a really busy clinic schedule, and so sometimes my day is sort of reverted to I'll do work like working out after work. Today I was able to do my exercise in the morning before work. So that's what I love about my Wednesdays. I switch my schedule around a little bit. So any kind of movement for me is, super important. If I can get outside, I will. The temperature here in New York now is it's not quite
Mm.
like super warm, but if I can get outside, even if it's like in the 40s
Mm.
Fahrenheit, I try to get some sun every day, or again, light and movement. And then, of course, like I take lots of supplements. I eat really healthy, so I had my carnivore. Uh, we'll call it a brunch today. It was sort of like breakfast, lunch, and which usually consists of some kind of really great animal protein. Today was eggs and bison. Sometimes I'll throw some bacon on. And so yeah, it's a pretty good day for me so far.
Awesome. Yeah, I love
Thank
that.
you.
So, I mean, Johns Hopkins and all this other, your resume is extremely extensive, and I just wonder what brought you from kind of all of that into the study of mast cell activation syndrome. Well, obviously, we're going to go into what that means, but
Yeah.
just to kind of take a moment to appreciate your background and the level of kind of skill set that you have.
Thank you. Thank you. So, the way I think about my journey in medicine, I always had a very holistic view of the body and healing. So I kind of grew up with my grandmother, my mother, sort of always trying to look at a more natural way of treating diseases. Like I'll give you like an example. I love this. I love this little example. When I was a teenager, if I had a pimple, my mother would be like, "Oh, let me consult the vitamin Bible." There was a book, I think it was called the Vitamin Bible. And, she'd look at the book and be like, "Oh, maybe you need zinc and maybe you need vitamin D and maybe. So I kind of grew up with this a little more holistic view that there were other ways that we could heal ourselves. But when I went to medical school, and of course, it is the number one medical school in the country, it's very focused on the science and the leading edge of and cutting edge of medicine. And I appreciate that training that I got, because you had to think critically, you had to learn a lot of stuff. But I always kept my life separate from my career.
Mm.
So I'm learning what I need to know about treating patients. I'm treating patients in a certain way, but in my life, I'm exercising. I'm thinking about my diet. I'm thinking about my lifestyle. I'm thinking about all the things to keep myself healthy. And yet, when I'm seeing patients, I'm not supposed to talk about that stuff. I'm supposed to, give them their blood pressure medicine, give them their cholesterol medication, give them, and so for a long time they were like sort of in like competition with each other. And at some point, like they couldn't exist separately. At some point, I would say, as I'm sitting with a patient, like, I really just want to talk to them about their lifestyle, about stress, about meditation, about, I just know that there's more that I can do for them than just giving them a pill. And so once I kind of realized that that's what really I wanted to do with patients, not only looking at it from a more holistic way of treating, but understanding them in a holistic way, the whole body. The whole body, mind, body, spirit, everything has to be looked at. We can't just look at it with a narrow lens. And so once I started doing that, it was impossible for me to continue seeing patients in the regular allopathic medical
Mm.
model, right? So I left this multi-specialty practice I was with, and I started my own practice. And my intention was to really do sort of root cause medicine, integrative medicine, treat the whole person, and and take time to get to know patients, right? Take time to understand their family, take time to understand, what's going on in their life, because then I could be a better doctor. And once I started doing that and spending time with patients and trying to dig deep to try to, again, get them better, inevitably, like when you start doing that, you start to find things that you didn't realize. And so what happened was first, I started really understanding the role of infections and vector-borne infections. I practice in a hotbed for Lyme disease, and but I didn't realize it until I had a colleague who sort of said to me, hey, have you thought about all the Lyme, disease you're missing in your community? And I'm like, really? And then I started seeing that. And once you start seeing that and you start understanding environmental triggers like mold and other and chemicals, and you start looking at all these pieces, you start to understand that there's something about the immune system that goes awry when people are exposed. And so I started really sort of focusing on the immune system. And I have one patient in particular who I really could not figure out. There was something very clearly wrong with her immune system. It looked like it was overactive in some ways, underactive in other ways. And I just kept digging and digging. And I just remember one day coming across this condition known as Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. And I remember my conversation with her. This was probably at this point, maybe 11 years ago, something like that, maybe even 12. I remember, just bringing it up and saying, I know this may be crazy, but there's so many things about your history that makes me think of this particular condition. I'm just learning about it. I don't know that much about it. And so it turns out that she's one of those patients that's very, much into, reading and researching and trying to figure it out herself. So she took it upon herself to start researching. And she had a family member who was at the NIH, I think. And he told her, you need to connect with this doctor, Dr. Larry Afrin. And he's one of the world's experts in this condition. And so she said to me, I really appreciate it if you could connect with this doctor. And I was thinking to myself, okay, I'll try, but why would he talk to me? And I remember calling his office, and his secretary was like, yeah, no problem. He can talk to you, in 2 days or something. I was like, oh, okay. And I talked to him, picked his brain about everything mast cell activation. I think we talked for 2 or 3 hours. And I got off that call and I said, one of those like aha moments, like, I think I have lots of patients with this, not this one patient, but the one patient was the one that brought me in contact with him. Once was in contact with him, then I was, now seeing like, wow, this is incredible. How many patients are afflicted with this? And now that I understand this, I'm going to try to understand it even more. And as much as I know, and as much as you might consider me an expert, right? I feel like I still don't know a lot, right? That's the thing about medicine. I still don't know, and I learn every day from my patients.
When I was at the HEAL conference at Gaia in Colorado a few months ago, I took with me a jar of Wise Earth adaptogenic honey that I'd been using for an autoimmune trigger, and I left it on the snack table for people to try. On the second day, there was a group of producers and tech people standing around the table looking in awe about something, so I went over. Turns out they'd tried the honey. One of them said, "What the hell is in this stuff? I feel awake and alive for the first time in ages, and I only just took a half spoon 5 minutes ago." Then Kelly Noonan-Gores of the HEAL documentary, who was hosting the event, was like, "Give me some, I need a pick-me-up." This was at the end of a very long, amazing, but draining weekend. She took a half spoon and instantly felt revitalized for the rest of the day. Within minutes, all the incredible speakers, Gaia directors, engineers, everyone was taking this honey, and it was like the energy in the room up-leveled in a way I've never seen. I'm telling you the story exactly as it happened, which is why I'm bringing you this here on Reconditioned. Wise Earth adaptogenic honey was created in response to founder Daniel losing his sister to cancer. It uses traditional Chinese medicine and cutting-edge extraction technology to create a potent adaptogenic honey designed to combat the current leading health issue, chronic inflammation, which is how everything starts. It's helped people from all over the world combat challenges from lack of energy to digestive issues to hormonal imbalances and a range of chronic illnesses. It uses the absolute best quality honey as a carrier of adaptogens such as reishi, chaga, and cordyceps to enhance both bioavailability and taste, ensuring maximum potency and effectiveness. Mix it into your coffee, whack it in your smoothie, or just take it neat on a spoon. You only need a little bit a day for the effects to work. And as I've seen from those around me and my own experience, those effects are huge. So visit wiseearth.uk, that's WYSE, earth.uk for UK or .com for US, and use code Lauren10 for a 10% discount.
And so
Can I just say that
yeah.
in my experience of being in the system my whole life, having been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease at the age of 2, the best doctors are the ones that say that and know that. And as my spiritual teacher says, the only masters, the true masters, are the ones who know they know nothing. You know, my experience with
It's
doctors think
true.
they know everything because they've read the textbooks and they've been to medical school. And if you come to them with new information, they almost get offended that, God forbid, you should assume that you know something they don't. That's been my experience. So it's so refreshing to hear a doctor say that, you know, to appreciate that
Thank you.
science is always updating itself. We're always going to learn more, and we should be eternal students.
No, absolutely. And I feel that way. And I love when my patients come to me and say, but I have this condition, if I don't know about it, I'll say to them, I don't know. Let me research this. Let me talk to my colleagues. Let me see how we can figure it out.
Mm,
And I think that's the way medicine should be, right? Every doctor should be curious
mm,
about things that they don't understand or don't know. But unfortunately, I'm sorry that you've been through that sort of the system and had, struggled through it. I feel so bad for so many people, and I've certainly had my own um, run-ins with the medical profession, myself, my family, and being gaslit and whatever else. Even somebody who I consider myself a pretty smart person, and I can't, even navigate sometimes the medical world because of the stubbornness, the rigidity that kind of exists out there. So for me, it's always like I need to learn more. I will continue learning for the rest of my life. I'll never stop, and I'm committed to helping every patient that
mhm.
I meet or come in contact with. If there's something we don't know, we've got to figure it out. And the reality is that our bodies are, again, as much as we know, we don't know, right?
No.
There's so many things that are happening that we just, can't possibly know. Maybe we will eventually, maybe in 50 years, 100 years, I don't know. Maybe we'll know everything,
Maybe we're
but
not
not,
meant to as well. You know, I always think that there
yeah,
is a higher purpose to why we get sick, and sometimes we're not meant to understand all of it, or sometimes we're meant to go. I truly believe that our dis-ease journeys we're meant to go through, that's it shapes us. You know, and that is kind of part of it. So maybe we won't always know, but we do know now lots about mast cell activation. So
yeah,
can we start at the
sure.
root? What is mast cell activation syndrome, and why is it so commonly missed or misdiagnosed?
Yeah. So mast cell activation syndrome is a multi-system inflammatory condition, meaning that it involves multiple parts of the body, multi-system, and it's definitely rooted in inflammation. Okay. Now, mast cells are white blood cells, and they are part of what we call the ancestral immune system. It's the innate immune system. It's a primitive immune system that is very responsive to the environment. So they are white blood cells that are actually in all our organs and tissue that are in contact with the environment. So if we look back sort of evolutionarily, or if we think about anthropologic stuff, we start to understand that mast cells were really helping us deal with infections, parasites, whatever was in our environment, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of years ago. Mast cells are in the respiratory tract, in the GI tract, in the skin. They're in the nervous system. They're in the GU tract. So they're everywhere. Where again, they can help us fight. But again, in early human days, we were fighting mostly infection, and we did not have a lot of environmental toxins to deal with, right? So fast forward to modern times. Now they are, helping us deal with mold, petrochemicals, pesticides, various things that we put in our body, on our body, breathe in, and everybody has mast cells, and everybody's mast cells will get triggered at some point in their life by something. And I like to use the sort of analogy of COVID. Okay, that's just a sort of an easy thing that a lot of people can understand. It's a virus. If you're exposed to it, your mast cells will respond, will release. One of the ways that mast cells work is they sort of explode and they release various chemicals. The chemical that a lot of people have heard of is histamine, but mast cells actually can release over 1,200 different chemicals. And they have lots of different receptors on their surface that are reading the environment, hundreds of them. So um, if you get exposed to a virus, the mast cell explodes. Mast cells are also involved in allergy. So if you're exposed to pollen in the air or something, mast cells do the same thing. They explode. They release these chemicals. They cause an inflammatory reaction wherever they're exploding. So let's just say COVID causes like a cold-like illness. Some of that is induced by the mast cells that are being, releasing these inflammatory chemicals, causing local inflammation. But if you don't have mast cell activation syndrome, what happens is you attack, you call in other white blood cells and other parts of the immune system to help. You deal with the infection, everything goes back to normal, and you wait for the next attack. If you have mast cell activation syndrome, your mast cells are always a little more reactive, even at baseline. So before you get sick, they are just like sitting there and kind of leaking chemicals, slow leak. Some of those leaks may be, really unperceptible, like not, registering with the patient that there's anything wrong. It could be very, kind of very mild. Okay. So a person might have some migraines on occasion, and maybe it doesn't really like occur to them that they have a bigger problem. Maybe they just have some menstrual irregularities. Maybe they have, occasionally they get, some allergy symptoms, but they've been told they don't have allergy or something like that. Then they get, let's say, a virus like COVID, or they get exposed to a major trigger. The mast cells respond like they did in the normal person who doesn't have this condition. But the problem is that after the attack is over, the mast cells don't stop. And now where they were leaking before a little bit and causing some inflammation, after that big trigger, they are now consistently causing more leaking of these inflammatory chemicals. And then they sort of continue that process. And so that may be part of what we see in, let's say, the long COVID syndrome, where there's persistent inflammatory reactions, persistent cytokine release, persistent inflammation. And so that's really the hallmark of mast cell activation syndrome. It's, again, multisystemic, so it almost always involves multiple systems. It's rare to just see it in one part of the body, and it's inflammatory. It can involve allergic phenomena in some people, but does not need to include allergic phenomena. And I'm going to get to that in a second. And the other hallmark feature is that it can cause what we call dystrophisms, abnormal growth and development. So because they're involved in normal mast cells are involved in growth and development, if they're abnormal, they're going to cause abnormal growth and development. So they can cause little tumors, little cysts, things that shouldn't be there growing. The mast cells can cause them to grow. So these are sort of the features, the hallmark features of mast cell activation syndrome. Now, the reason why it's often missed or not thought of is because there's a population of doctors that tend to think that people have to have allergic symptoms with it, but you don't need it. So certainly you could have. I have lots of patients, they've been to the allergist, they get negative allergy testing, they still don't know why they're reacting. And at the end of the day, we find out they have mast cell activation syndrome, but there are lots of patients who have no allergic symptoms whatsoever, and their inflammatory symptoms are, in the multiple parts of the body. I think it's also very undiagnosed because a lot of it to mainstream doctors is it almost doesn't make sense. The symptoms wax and wane. They can be persistent. They can not be persistent. There's so many features that seem so unusual that it's almost like, the medical professionals cannot even like wrap their head around, like how is that possible? It sort of defies what people know about disease states. And so I think that's part of the problem, that there's just so many things that we don't understand about why this is happening. I think that, for people who are highly reactive, they react to various medications, they react to various supplements, they react to food. Unfortunately, a lot of these patients are made to sort of feel like it's in their head. Like, it's impossible. You can't be, allergic to all those things. It's not possible, right? According to, the textbook. But it is. And there are lots of reasons, and it's very clear scientifically why that's happening, but they don't necessarily want to understand it. The other thing that I think is a problem is that I think we're seeing an uptick in this condition. And it's not just because we're identifying it. Like, there are more people like you, me, and many others all over social media talking about it. So I think some people tend to think that maybe patients or even doctors are talking too much about it, and so that's why we're diagnosing it. It's like, sort of like when people say, oh, autism is not really on the rise, it's because we can diagnose it better, right? I don't think that's the case. I think there's a reason autism is on the rise. And I believe autism is very much related to mast cell activation syndrome.
I
Mast cell
agree.
activation
I'm
syndrome.
excited to talk to you about that.
Yeah, we should definitely cover that. We have, again, this is a time in our lives like no other. The amount of chemicals and foreign substances that we are exposed to, that our immune systems are not prepared for and weren't prepared for hundreds of thousands of years, are now having to fight. And I think it's that change in our environment that has brought this out and will continue to bring it out. And I think that, we use estimates of like 17% of the population. In 2017, there was a study done that showed that 17% of the population of Germany had mast cell activation syndrome on some, part of the spectrum. Could be very, very mild, could be very severe, 17%. And I think that the numbers are going to be higher. I think they're probably closer to 20%, and they may even be higher than that. 1 in 5 people walking around some component of mast cell activation syndrome. And so it's not that we're talking more about it, it's that there really are people, more and more, who are afflicted with it. And I think maybe at some point in time, maybe these people were able to tolerate, the abnormal mast cell activation, just because there wasn't a constant assault on them.
Right.
Now they can't handle it anymore. And I think post-COVID, we're absolutely seeing more of that. And then again, this constant environmental exposure to all the stuff that is just, it's incomprehensible. Microplastics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
If you've chosen to listen to this podcast, I probably don't need to tell you about the importance of connecting with the Earth's electromagnetic field daily, a lot, if we want to optimize health. Spending more time grounding, i.e. barefoot on the earth, actually helps the healing process and boosts immune function. But the reality is that most of us just aren't outdoors enough to get the full benefits of connecting with the natural frequencies of the earth. Even our footwear blocks this connection. So what do? Well, enter earthing sheets. I have an earthing sheet in my bed from Roland Earthing, and I've not only noticed an improvement in my sleep quality, yay, but also an improvement in overall vitality. By sleeping on an earthing sheet, you restore the electrical connection to the earth that you miss out on by not being on the earth enough during sleep, replicating being grounded in nature. And it works best this way because our bodies repair while we sleep, and we're there for ages. So really, this is the most valuable time to maximize efficiency of your earthing practice. The sheets are made from organic cotton and they just go under your bedsheet. And not just that, Roland Earthing donates 1% of all sales to Farmers Footprint, Zach Bush's amazing charitable organization, which really means a lot to me. Earthing sheets are also said to be really great for children with sleep issues, and cognitive challenges. So, all in all, I couldn't recommend these earthing sheets enough. And you can get a 5% discount by visiting rowlandearthing.co.uk. That's ROWLAND earthing.co.uk. And use the code Lauren5 to get a great 5% discount off your first order. Yeah. Amazing explanation. My head is spinning just because I have a lot of questions that no, in a good way, because so I've been playing with this for a while now, and I tend to research stuff quite deeply, and there are missing pieces for me that I can't seem to put together.
Okay.
And I probably won't articulate this as well as I want to, but I hope that you will kind of understand what I'm saying. And that I don't ramble for everyone listening. What I was trying to figure out was let's start with this. What comes first, the autoimmune trigger or the mast cell activation? Is it the same thing? Are they connected? Because if we're looking at, here are your mast cells and you have mast cells that get activated, right? Now, is that in essence the autoimmune trigger in itself? Is that, because an autoimmune trigger is obviously the immune system attacking itself. The mast cells are part of the immune system, as you said, the primitive immune system. So it's all the same thing. So is it which one comes first, or is it actually the same thing? So let's start with that, and then I'll try and unpack that a bit more so that I don't ramble.
Yeah. No. You did a great job. And I think you're thinking about it the right way. And so the way I think about it is that I think there is a genetic predisposition that some people have. And so we typically see clusters of diseases, conditions, et cetera, in families. We have families that have more of that autoimmune-ish like stuff. Sometimes they don't have an autoimmune disease, but they have a lot of autoimmune um, antibodies that show up, like a positive ANA or a positive rheumatoid factor, or they have thyroid antibodies. So we know that there are these clusters of families that have that. We have clusters of family members that have other things. And so we are starting to understand that there is some genetic component. We don't know what the gene is, though. And there's likely not one gene, is my guess. But there is something that predisposes some people to more activation of the mast cell. Okay. Then I think there are for many patients, early childhood triggers that over time escalate and bring out various conditions. Sometimes the patient will present very early in life with an autoimmune condition or something. Sometimes they don't present until they're an adolescent or past their adolescent years. So everyone is different. I think it depends on the types of exposures they have. It depends on their immune system. Depends on their level of stress, trauma. I mean, again, there's so many factors that we can't even imagine, right? For each individual person, what's going to be the thing that's going to set them off. But I think it's that what's happening is that the immune system, the mast cells have that predisposition to be more reactive, and they're faced with a trigger. What mast cells do beyond exploding and releasing chemicals is that they also communicate directly with other parts of the immune system. So let's take, for example, there are cells, other white blood cells in the immune system that make antibodies. The B cells, the B lymphocytes. Okay, they are responsible for kicking in. They're part of what we call the adaptive immune system. So the innate immune system, the primitive immune system, is like, oh my gosh, there's a fire. We got to put it out. Okay, and it starts to react. And the innate immune system then says to the adaptive immune system, okay, help me out, right? This is going to become a more chronic condition. So I need something to help continue to fight. So the mast cells call in the troops, and they'll call in these cells that make antibodies, for instance. And those antibodies that they're kind of stimulating these cells to make could be like real antibodies, let's say you're exposed to Epstein-Barr, which is like the virus that causes mono, the mast cells will say, hey, there's mono here, Epstein-Barr, make some antibodies. We got to fight this virus. And that's a productive response. Okay, that's a good response. You need those antibodies to continue fighting the virus. But sometimes the mast cells send a faulty signal and say, hey, there's something wrong in the thyroid. Can you start producing antibodies to the thyroid? And now it's an autoimmune condition that's being stimulated. Now the body's attacking the thyroid, or it's attacking the nucleus of the cell, that's the ANA, or it's sending this almost like a faulty signal to cause this antibody production. And sometimes those antibodies are actually doing something bad, like, oh, it's attacking the thyroid and now you've developed a autoimmune thyroid condition, or you're making this antibody, but it's actually not doing anything. It's actually not a true autoimmune disease. It just looks like one. So I guess to answer your question, I think that the mast cells are intimately um, related to autoimmune disease. I think they are an initiator for some autoimmune diseases. I'm sure that there are autoimmune diseases that go the other way. So there's an autoimmune reaction that then sets off the mast cells. I'm sure there's like almost a bidirectional thing in some patients. So, again, does it go from mast cell to the autoimmunity, or autoimmunity to mast cell, or maybe both? Um, and so I think what I see very frequently is people coming to me with autoimmune diagnoses who don't, in fact, have true autoimmune diseases. But because the doctors don't know, they can't explain the symptoms, and they see the antibodies in the blood, they make this assumption, since they don't know what else it could be, then they start with, it's lupus, it's psoriasis, it's rheumatoid arthritis, it's Hashimoto's, it's whatever, Crohn's, inflammatory bowel. And again, in some cases, it may truly be an autoimmune disease. And in some cases, it's a faulty mast cell response that's causing the body to look like it's having an autoimmune reaction. Does that make sense at all?
It makes a lot of sense. And I guess really at the end of the day, does it matter that much? No, because we're going in for the root cause, and we're trying to figure out where the body is lacking wholeness, where the body is out of balance. So, it's interesting what you said about families and those family clusters, but even there's so much nuance. So, in my family, for example, there's no autoimmunity, thank God. I was the lucky one. But for example, with me, I can't say the word because it will get banned from YouTube, but it was triggered by the measles rubella V in 1986, just before the MMR was released in 1988. That triggered swelling immediately in my ankles, and then that was diagnosed, as rheumatoid arthritis. Now, if you go further back, which I have done because I'd like to try and find the answers, what we realized, so what's the difference between me and my sister, who both had we're both on the same schedule. Now, when my mum gave birth to me, she wasn't able to hold me or breastfeed me because she had an infection in the hospital and came up with boils all over her body. So I wasn't held by my mother for the first 2 weeks, nor was I breastfed, right? So you've got all the formula milks with the hydrogenated oils, the synthetic vitamins, all of that. So if I have a genetic predisposition to, let's say, MTHFR, I know there are so many other genes, but let's say MTHFR, which is going to make me not be able to process those synthetic vitamins for a start, then I didn't get that passing on of the microbiome, and there were other factors in my mum's pregnancy that I think contributed. So if you look at that, it's not always so clear cut. And I think a message that I hope people listening will take is, it's not just, that V when I was 2 triggered it. There's so much. Yes, that was the case, and I'm always going to take that into consideration, especially with my kids. And I'm not taking any
Mm-hmm.
chances. And that's a whole nother, conversation altogether. But it's never just one thing. It's never just one trigger. It's never one root cause. It's never one thing that's going to
Yeah.
heal you. And so it's that. So when people go, well, if it was the V, then it would have affected your sister as well. Nothing is that black and white. There's nuance to everything. So I guess,
Yeah,
we
that's a
could
very
talk,
good point.
and
Yeah,
we could
no,
talk
that's a
about
very
the.
important point.
Yeah, and I really hope people kind of take that into account. That's always my kind of biggest takeaway for people in anything is, that there's always multiple nuance in everything. There's no black and white in
Right,
anything. And I think
right.
the biggest problem of humans is we expect everything to be black and white, even though nothing in history has shown us that anything is black and white. And I could talk about this and kind of the root causes in that for a long time, but I'm not sure that's actually what's going to continue benefiting people to continue hearing that. So, what I'd love you to speak about is how it's affecting people, how it's manifesting, because I've since seen people. So I've had allergies, unexplained allergies my whole life on and off. And my kind of historical understanding of it was obviously it's connected to the immune system.
Hmm.
Because I have an underlying autoimmune disease. I might have been in remission now for 11 and a half years, but there's always going to be, once it's triggered, it's triggered. So a couple of years ago, I came up with this aha moment. I was researching and researching because I have these very strange, unexplained allergy attacks. Always been allergic to certain animals, but I'm a major animal lover. And I get horrendous, I mean horrendous reactions to mosquito bites whenever I
Mm-hmm.
go on holiday. And they swell. I mean, they end up being the
As
size of
well.
my arm. They swell, they
Hmm.
leak pus for like 3 days. I cannot tell you. And then it sets off inflammation in my knees. When it did it the last time, I was like, I get an insect bite and then it
Hmm.
sets off inflammation in my knees. So the histamine is somehow related. So that's when I figured out mast cell. And I was
Mm.
like, all this is connecting now. And since that, I've then met people and spoken to people who it affects in some horrendous ways, full body rashes, can't move, and nothing's explained until they realize that mast cell activation is a thing and they start delving into it. So, how does it manifest in people? Let's start there. What are you seeing in people?
So because it's a multi-system inflammatory condition, it can manifest in any body part, in multiple body parts. And in the way you describe, it could be episodic. It could be in response to specific triggers, whether it's bug bite or exposure to an animal. Sometimes the triggers are not identifiable. That's very frustrating when you really don't even know what is precipitating it. But every organ system, can be affected, right? So I have this slide that I often use when I give presentations, just like every organ system. So, if you start at the top, right, you could say headaches, anxiety, depression, mood changes, bipolar, OCD,
Could be
any
anything.
neurologic symptom, numbness, tingling, pain, swelling of any part of the body, right? To skin, hives, rashes, just sensitivities to various, lotions or detergents, or, again, sometimes unidentifiable. It could be respiratory, could be GI, could be GU, get the genital urinary tract. So vaginitis, uh, vulvovaginitis, vestibulodynia, dyspareunia, abnormal bleeding, abnormal menstrual cycles. Um, I mean, it's just like, again, the list goes on. Interstitial cystitis type symptoms, so frequent urination or feeling like you have a UTI, and bowel problems. It could be diarrhea, it could be constipation, could be bouts of both, could be an inflammatory, almost like an inflammatory bowel type situation. It could be or an irritable bowel type situation. So again, right, like the list is many.
So, if you have
And
unexplained symptoms and whatever you're doing isn't working, the likelihood is it could be mast cell activation.
I think if you haven't figured it out and there isn't anything else that can explain those symptoms, I think it's absolutely worthwhile to explore this condition, because there's so many treatment options, and there's so many ways to combat it. Eliminating triggers, again, treatments, both natural, pharmaceutical. So to me, it's like, yeah, if nothing else makes sense, maybe this explains it. I think that, the way you described your symptoms, right, makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I can't diagnose you right on a podcast, but you certainly have, right, this sort of history of a reaction to a V. Okay.
Mhm.
And we published, actually, Dr. Affron and I published last year, and was it, oh, actually, maybe it's now 2 or 3 years ago, and a sort of retrospective case analysis, case study, looking at post HPV vaccine, Gardasil,
Mhm.
and basically, how that may be related to mast cell activation syndrome. And so what we showed is that not that the vaccine or any particular vaccine causes mast cell activation syndrome, but rather brings out a vulnerability. And in some people, that vulnerability is brought out by the HPV vaccine or the MMR or the COVID or the flu or whatever potential trigger. Again, it's not that that vaccine is bad, and I'm very much pro vaccine, but it's understanding the patient's vulnerabilities and trying to figure out if there are things that should be done to prevent potential effects. And
Mhm.
so what I would say is that if people know they've reacted to these, if they know they've reacted to certain medications, if they know that it's worth exploring whether MCAS could potentially be the reason that they reacted, that their mast cells saw that particular thing, foreign thing, injected into the body or implanted in the body or whatever, and saw it as, again, foreign, and it went into overdrive, causing various symptoms, whether it's triggering a autoimmune like condition, or whether it's triggering its own set of symptoms. Very often there's an excipient mixed in the vaccine. It may not even be the vaccine itself. It may not even be the thing. It may be the formulation. Actually, there's some studies that show that the Gardasil vaccine, the HPV vaccine that is given in Europe, is different from the vaccine we get here. And so there actually seems to be less problems with the European version compared to the American version. And so it's the base is the same. It's what's mixed with it that
Mhm.
may be the problem and may be bringing out this issue. So again, I've published on this. Like I understand that there are lots of potential things, and that can be a problem, but everyone is different. They're sort of the basis of what they were exposed to early on. Like you said, like when I take a history with a patient, I am looking at their mother's health when their mother was either before they got pregnant or when they
Mhm.
were pregnant or after delivery, because all those things set the stage for your immune system. And then, there are these other triggers that occur that then kind of bring it out. So if you have a
Mhm.
history and you're thinking, people are listening and are thinking about their childhood, they're thinking about things that happened, if they think about weird things that no one could figure out, you know, like maybe they had allergies that were not figured out. Maybe they have this, swelling in different parts of their body and they don't know why, or they have these various symptoms. And, let's say they have anxiety and no one can really,
Mhm.
really understand them. Um, you know, that it's worth understanding whether the immune system, and particularly the mast cells in the immune system, are really like the driver of that.
Mm. Yeah, there's so much to delve into there, and I do think that there is. I don't believe that illness falls out of thin air. That's my belief after 40 odd years on this planet and 20 odd years researching health. Um, I don't believe allergies are a natural occurrence. I don't believe people are meant to have allergies.
Right.
And I believe the level of allergies we're seeing in children now, like the level of autism, is, unprecedented. And I don't think it's normal, and it's being accepted and
Yep.
normalized in a way that is making it's just, this is just the way our children are, but there's something causing it. I kind of almost have an issue with the fact that my kids' school have an allergy awareness week. Now, from one perspective, obviously, as the mother, not me, but as for my kids don't have allergies, but as the mother of a child who has an allergy, of course, you want everyone in that school to be hyper vigilant, and you want to bring awareness because I
Mhm.
get that. I'm not, I don't not have compassion, but having an allergy awareness week is again normalizing allergies are normal. Lots of children have allergies, as opposed to educational. Why have we got these
Like
allergies? How
why?
can we remove
Yeah.
these allergies? Like, as I said to you, I used to have, really unexplained allergies to lots of animals. And I worked with my homeopath on it. And after a while, I stopped being allergic to short haired dogs. Now, again, I was missing some pieces because the
Mhm.
homeopathy, I mean, I'm the world's biggest fan of homeopathy, but as I always say, it's never going to be one thing that heals you,
Right.
right? So,
Right.
so the homeopathy helped it for a while, and I wasn't allergic to dogs for a while, but then I was again. So again, you
Mhm.
start delving, and then what I realized was there was a whole bunch of other stuff related to histamine that I needed to figure out. And that's what I want to talk to you about next, because I think
Mhm.
the conversation we've had up until now has given people a really good picture of what mast cell activation is and what it can do to you. What I
Mhm.
want to know is what your treatment plan will be. And I know everyone's different, but if I could just kind of mention the things, because I've had major, major improvement. I mean, my allergy attacks have gone since I started taking a few things in combination. So I would love to tell you about that. And then you could let me
I would.
know
Yeah.
what you think would be like. And again, anyone listening, please, please, it's a personalized approach. It
Right.
has to be
Right.
right for you. Figure out what your deficiencies are, what works for you. I, go deep into what I need. But I feel like DAO, diamine oxidase,
Mhm.
was the ultimate. It tipped the balance into really
Mhm.
helping me heal. And since starting to take that, I haven't had a single allergy attack. And
Okay.
I do that alongside quercetin and NAC. But then I also have the ones that I always take, which is magnesium, retinol, and cod liver oil. And then I've added in recently resveratrol because of some nerve stuff. So that in combination has taken away these allergy attacks, which I would have daily. It would last about half an hour. I would just sneeze and my nose would run and my eyes would water. I mean, it would happen when I was on a podcast and I would have to, turn my camera off
Oh.
so many times. And it's not happened now since I started this protocol of those specific supplements. And I think particularly the DAO has made a massive difference. So I know that depending on the scale or the severity, some people come to you
Mhm.
and when they just can't even move, you might have to consider an allopathic or pharmaceutical just to kind of get
Mhm.
them to that point. So start from there if you
Mhm.
would.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I'll back up a little bit because I think it's what's important for people to know. I think, again, there's a lot of talk um, in social media. I've heard lots of podcasts, and you're certainly talking about it. This sort of concentration on histamine and the histamine response, and I think there's no question that it's important for some patients, but it's one of over 1,200 different chemicals that mast cells can make. So when I hear that sort of story where the DAO, the quercetin, these very specific compounds are helping someone's mast cell issues, then I have a higher index of suspicion that histamine is actually one of their major issues.
Which I
Now,
knew it was for me because of the insect bites. That's what did it for me, right? When I was looking at all the symptoms, and sorry to interrupt, it's just
yeah, yeah,
when
yeah,
people are listening and trying to, that's how I fit the pieces together. I'm like, there's the inflammation element, there's the animals element, and then there's the insect bites. And it was the insect bite thing that kind of put the pieces together and made me realize it's the histamine thing for me.
right. But I'll argue the other side, and that is that I have patients who have the insect bite thing, the allergic phenomena, and actually have very little histamine. when we measure it and we do blood work, urine, it turns out that histamine is actually not the problem, but they may have high levels of leukotrienes or prostaglandins, or there are, again, we out of 1,200 chemicals that mast cells can make, we really can only like detect barely a couple of handfuls. It's really like a handful and a half. um, so I think there are a lot that we don't know about, and unfortunately there are some of these chemicals, these mediators, that we don't have anything to target yet. We don't know how to target them, but there's some that we can target. We can target histamine, we can target prostaglandins, we can target leukotrienes. So a lot of it though is still trial and error, and this is the point I want to make. And I think that is really great that you've been able to figure out that histamine is your issue, and that, again, diamine oxidase, DAO, is a enzyme that breaks down histamine. Now, it is in the gut, but a lot of people either don't have enough of it. There are various reasons why some people don't have enough of that enzyme. They need to take it to help them break down the histamine that's in their gut. And they need quercetin to help block histamine and stabilize mast cells and other parts, right? So you need like that sort of multi-pronged approach. But there are some people where blocking the histamine is not going to do much because histamine actually isn't their problem.
Mm.
But you can't tell based on symptoms.
So
You're
it makes
just
it very
lucky.
hard.
You're lucky. Well, I don't, you're not lucky to have these issues, but you're lucky that you were
Yeah.
able to pinpoint it to histamine. And so what happens is a lot of people listen to this talk about histamine and histamine intolerance and in social media. And then when they don't respond to the things that people talk about, right, then they get frustrated, or they think they can't have mast cell activation syndrome because they're not
Ah.
responding to the things that they think would work.
So what
And so
are the
this is,
other things?
well, again, like there are a lot of them are in the pharmaceutical realm, but there are other compounds that we sometimes use to see if we can, again, calm down the mast cell. Maybe it's not attacking a particular chemical, but it's just stabilizing the mast cell, right? Quercetin is one of those that has some antihistamine properties, but also has some mast cell stabilizing properties.
Mm.
Luteolin is another one that has some mast cell stabilizing properties, doesn't only focus on histamine, right? So those are great compounds that I kind of think of like, killing a few birds with one stone type of thing. But with sometimes you have to really just trial and error. You start with maybe the antihistamines, whether they're natural or pharmacologic. Maybe we try leukotriene inhibitors, montelukast, zafirlukast, or maybe we need to block prostaglandin D2 and the COX enzymes. So it could be anti-inflammatories, aspirin. There are a number of different drugs in that class. Um, we have various mast cell stabilizers, cromolyn, which doesn't target any particular compound but stabilizes the mast cell. We have things like low-dose naltrexone, which also is a mast cell stabilizer and doesn't attack a particular chemical either, right? So sometimes we have to, again, try various things. Often people need more than one thing. Like you've noticed with yourself, right? That you've over time have sort of figured out that these are the various compounds that really do well for you. And I would say that those are very often the things that are good for my patients too, right? I don't think it's that, magnesium is, for a lot of patients, very important, or cod liver oil or fish oil, or those types of things. So there's something to be said about, like, a lot of human beings on this planet need some of those nutrients, whether they're specifically attacking and helping with their mast cells, or they're helping the overall health of the body, which then allows the mast cells to not have to work as hard, right? It may be a combination of them. So it is a very personalized approach. I think that it's helpful. We have the tools. I have the tools here that unfortunately a lot of people don't have. It's harder to get tested in the UK. It's harder to get tested in Europe, but there are some pockets of places where you might be able to get tested. We're lucky we can do the testing here, where we can at least measure a few of these mediators. Again, if you could find one or two, then you maybe that helps you determine what you're going to try to target that, specifically. Sometimes it's not that easy. Like sometimes we see an elevated leukotriene and I say, oh, great. Now I'm going to try the drugs that block leukotriene, and then they don't work. And we're like, oh, gosh, all right, that was a bummer. Like I thought we were on to
Right.
something, right? And sometimes it doesn't
It's
work. And
trial and
sometimes,
error. Trial and
yeah,
error is part of the
yeah,
journey. Do you
yeah.
have any colleagues in the UK who specialize in this here? Because the tests will always be different, won't they?
Yeah, I think the colleagues that I've talked to in the UK are struggling with the testing. So
Mm.
a lot of it is a clinical diagnosis,
Right.
which I think is fine. I just because we do research here, we want to make sure to get people a diagnosis. But but again, sometimes, especially if the treatment is low risk, a clinical diagnosis, which is what a lot of the UK docs are doing. And I can offline. I don't want to announce their names in case they're not taking new patients or something. But I can definitely share with you some of my colleagues who are doing amazing work there. Um, but yeah, you do your best, to try to help
Mm.
people. I think I think what's great about what you're doing in getting the word out to your audience and teaching them and sharing your own journey is that, we live in a time when, however you look at fortunate or unfortunately, patients have to be their own advocate
Yeah,
more and
100%.
more.
Yeah. You've got to be a
And
detective just to heal.
yeah, yeah. And it's not fair. I feel bad that patients are put in that position, but I also think it is unfortunately the way it has to be
Yeah.
because the breakdown of the medical system. So putting the content out, teaching people, right, helps people understand themselves better, can advocate for themselves, hopefully find healthcare practitioners who are willing to listen,
Mm.
to work with them, to help them find the path, right?
Yeah.
What I would say is that it's very hard to treat yourself. I think being more aware of this and getting ideas is one thing. Working on your diet, working on some supplements, I think you could certainly do on your own, but I think having a partner in the healthcare system who really can help you navigate these things is really important. So
Yeah,
you
for
still have to
sure.
look for that person.
Yeah, I'm always working, with a homeopath or a functional medicine doctor or whatever it is, and people, people in healthcare in one way or another who can continue supporting me in other clinics and whatnot. But I think that's the key, is that we can give this information, and someone might be listening to this going, "Wow, this is me." We're not here is not where you're going to find all the answers that will heal you right now, but it opens the door to having a deeper understanding of what your symptoms, your unexplained symptoms, could be as a result of. So it sets you on the path to start your own healing journey, and I think that's key.
Exactly.
um Something I want to ask you before, obviously we've spoken for quite a while, but I think it's really important to not end this conversation without talking about Lyme,
Yeah.
because it's obviously very much connected. We have a real issue with Lyme, not just in the UK, but I know you guys have it in the US too, because I have a lot of US clients that doctors don't want to diagnose it. Insurance companies don't want to insure it.
Yeah.
How is this connected to mast cell? Is it connected? What are we seeing in terms of Lyme treatments and progression and diagnosis?
So let's think about the immune system first. Okay. Part of the what we're talking about, or a big piece of what we're talking about, is really a faulty immune system. So MCAS, right, is that there's an inappropriate response of the immune system. And again, we know that mast cells are involved and have been, um, through evolution. They are our first line of defense against infection. And so you can imagine that if you have an infection of some kind, you've been exposed to something, whether it's Lyme or whether it's strep or whether it's Epstein-Barr or COVID or whatever, the body has to deal with the infection. So what we know more and more is that the majority of infections that we've been faced with over the course of our lives become dormant in our body. Okay. And I think this is a very, very important point. And I think this is really um, under, uh, how do I say this? Just not understood well by mainstream medicine. But however, there's plenty of studies in mainstream medicine that support this idea. But I think that people and doctors typically want to believe that you take an antibiotic for a particular infection and it goes away. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example, and then I promise I'll talk about Lyme, but I think it's important to give this example of like your kid gets strep throat, or you get strep throat or something, or you have a history of strep. I like to think about strep because it's one of those infections that pediatricians treat, internal medicine doctors treat. You get the strep test, you have a sore throat, you treat with antibiotics for 10 days with penicillin or something, and then presumably after 10 days it's gone and you're better. But very often people will get a second round of strep after they finish the antibiotics, and the doctors will say, oh yeah, it's going around the school, you probably caught it again, right? That's why you got your second round of strep. No, the second round of strep was from the first round of strep that didn't go away. And this is what happens, right? When you have strep, I like to think of it as like you have a million strep bacteria living in your throat. You take antibiotics, it goes from a million to maybe 100 or 10 or whatever, but it's never zero. The antibiotics bring the counts down, then the immune system kicks in and takes over. And if the immune system takes over, the few strep bacteria that are left are going to be taken care of. You're not going to get sick again. But if the immune system plummets, the strep take over and they go from 10 or 100 to back to a million. You have strep again, you're going to need to take antibiotics.
But
So the
presumably, if
reality
you're
is,
taking antibiotics consistently, like a lot of kids now do, then
mhm,
that's breaking down the gut microbiome, which is weakening the immune system anyway. So then the immune system can't do the thing that it's trying to do.
right, and it becomes a vicious cycle
Right.
for sure. But I want to drive home this point of the fact that infections don't necessarily go away. They just go kind of dormant and they kind of stay there. So then the immune system, right, is dealing with that. It's dealing with strep, it's dealing with the viruses. And then you get exposed to some kind of vector-borne infection, right? So Lyme is a vector-borne infection. It came from a vector, which is like a bite of the tick. But there are lots of vectors that you can be exposed to, like mosquito bites, like bites from biting flies, sandflies, um,
And all this
lice.
can cause Lyme, so it's not just tick bites.
Not Lyme,
Not
not
Lyme, right?
Lyme, but other vector-borne infections.
Right.
So Lyme is transmitted by tick, particular tick. There are other types of ticks that can transmit other types of infections, and there are other insects and vectors that can transmit other infections. They often go together. So I rarely see a patient with Lyme disease, and only they have Lyme disease. They often have other infections, either because the tick bite carried multiple infections or they've had multiple exposures over the course of their lives. So maybe they were, um, bitten by a tick one day and, a mosquito, a few months later or whatever.
Right.
Mosquitoes transmit Bartonella, they transmit Babesia, they transmit West Nile, they transmit a lot of other things. All these vectors all these vectors um, again, we're exposed to lots of them in our environment, and then so people get exposed. Now, if their immune system is adequate, they may not even know that they've been exposed to these things, right? I think there are people who are walking around who have multiple infections, but maybe they don't have mast cell activation syndrome. Maybe they have an immune system that is able to keep it at bay and just like suppress it enough so then it doesn't come out.
So if
I
they get
think
bitten
that,
by a tick, and these
yeah,
people have, so it's possible to get bitten by a tick, but to be someone who has a really strong constitution, like my husband, for example, and his whole family, they've got really strong constitutions. And so it's never going to kind of be a catalyst. Like they might get bitten by the tick, but it's not gonna be a catalyst for a trigger like it was with me. Well, not Lyme, but is that right? Is that what you're saying?
exactly.
So
Right.
not
What I'm
everyone
saying
who gets
is,
bitten by a tick will get Lyme.
yeah, I think that's the case. At
Mm.
least that's what I see in my practice. I often have families. I'm testing them. Some family members will say, "I want to get tested, but I feel fine. But my kids are sick, so I just want to know if I also have been exposed." And they're positive for the same stuff, but it's manifesting different in their
Mm.
body. And so this is the concept of the host
Right.
and the bugs.
Right.
And so they're equally important.
Hmm.
So when we talk about, Lyme and these infections, it's really about understanding why a person with Lyme or Bartonella or Babesia or any of these vector-borne infections are sick and they continue to be sick. And some of it is rooted in this dysfunctional mast cell activation syndrome. I think that is, in a way, predisposing many of these patients to have
Right.
persistent infection that is continuing to drive the immune system into more and
Right.
more dysfunction. So it becomes a vicious cycle. Does that kind of make
Yeah, so
sense?
it's like, so it just comes back to the whole thing of whatever your genetic makeup is. So for instance, if you've got certain genetic polymorphisms like I do that make you more susceptible, and you've got mast cell activation because you just have a weaker constitution, and then there's the vector that triggers it. But if, for example, you don't have, I know I've mentioned MTHFR, I know there are thousands of other genes, but just for argument's sake at the moment, you have MTHFR, you have mast cell activation, which are probably connected, right? If you've got mast cell activation, you're likely to have MTHFR.
No,
Then
and in fact, I have a lot of patients who have no
really,
MTHFR.
oh, I'm
So
so
I thought
intrigued
that
now.
I thought the same thing as you until I found that some of my sickest mast cell patients do not have any polymorphism abnormality
Oh,
with
wow,
MTHFR.
that has flipped everything on its
I
head.
know, I know, I know.
Interesting.
Yeah,
But still,
yeah,
it's a genetic makeup, right?
yeah,
So for
yeah, yeah,
whatever
yeah.
reason you are more susceptible to something, and
Correct.
then you've got the mast cell activation, and so that makes sense. So then there's people walking around who can get a tick bite, have the infection technically in them, but their body doesn't care about it. Their body's not going to initiate a reaction based off of it.
Yeah, exactly. And
Mm,
um, look, I don't want to minimize the fact that if you have Lyme in you, it could be insidious and it
mm.
could be
And something could
eventually,
trigger it eventually.
oh,
Yeah.
eventually, all of a sudden you have Lyme arthritis. It's eating away your joints, but you thought you felt fine. I mean, that's always possible. I don't want to minimize that because I certainly had patients like that as well. But I think that the people who have the hardest time healing
Mm,
and fighting through these infections. It's very often because of other exposures that they've had that have, maybe it's mold, maybe it's the V's, maybe it's some other things, whatever it is, traumas that then set the stage for the host not
mhm,
being able to handle it as well. Now, on the other side of things, there are other things that also cause what we'll call persistent infection. We know that these various bacteria um, can um, can change forms and exist in the body and hide from the immune system. So some of it is not us. Some of it is actually the bugs themselves have sort of learned how to camouflage themselves and hide, which makes it worse. We have biofilms that are really important in terms of like maybe causing a problem. So biofilms are like, I think about it almost like a spider web inside of you. It's this thing that things get stuck in, old cells, garbage of various kinds, but also infections can all live in a biofilm that can be circulating in the bloodstream. It can affect blood flow through the bloodstream, but these biofilms sort of protect these bacteria, parasites, fungus, lots of things. And so even so treatment may not get through the biofilm. And so it may actually not just be the immune system having a problem. It may be that these biofilms, because of, let's say the person has a propensity for more, let's say, blood clotting, or there's something else genetically that's making the body produce more biofilm. And then it's harder to treat because we can't get through the spider web of
Mm,
just not a spider web, but it's like a web of stuff that is stuck and you can't get out. So there are lots of reasons. I don't want to simplify it too much,
mm,
but I do think that MCAS, mast cell activation syndrome, is I think one of the important root causes of persistent infection.
right. And just off the basis of what you just said, do you see, if you work with someone really closely, does there tend to be a solution at the end? Like when you've tried, have you, are you finding solutions? Are you finding treatment plans that are working for most people?
Yeah, I mean, I listen, I'm relentless. That's, my personality. I will not give up. I'm here, I'm determined to get patients better. And so we find everybody's going to be different. I do homeopathy, I do herbal protocols, sometimes antibiotics, sometimes a combination of all those things. We use we have a therapy called SOT therapy that is it's a very targeted molecular therapy that basically lab creates a protein that matches the DNA of, let's say, the Lyme or the Bartonella or whatever you're trying to kill. And we infuse it. So we have a lab that we work with that makes this protein. Let's say it's Lyme disease. They make the protein that matches the DNA of your Lyme. It gets infused, and over the course of 4 to 6 months, it's in the body, basically killing the
Mm,
Lyme. So we have these new technologies that I'm excited about that have really changed my practice and have allowed me to use less antibiotics, which I always prefer. But sometimes, we need a combination of all those things.
mm,
We're looking at triggers, we're looking at mold, we're looking at things that are going to affect the ability to fight those infections, right? So I'm working on both sides. We got to work on the host, we got to work on the bugs, and we've got
the
to lower the
environment.
load.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the environment, right. So it's right, it's host bugs environment and and doing a little dance because it's sort of like, okay, we target this first, we move to this, we try to figure out for that person, how are we going to get them better? And a lot of times it's that we lower the load of the bugs, we change the environment, the host starts to recover, and then, whatever was there hopefully just is going to go into hiding. Because I don't know that we can actually kill. Again, this goes back to the whole strep story. I don't even know if we can kill everything really. But as long as it's dormant and is not affecting anything in the body, okay, that's fine. As long as you can be asymptomatic and live your life, it doesn't matter how many of those bugs are left as long as they're not active. And so that's what we do. That's what I do every day. And we manage, the mast cell response, and we manage whatever other immune system responses. And listen, there are challenging cases that take longer, and there are cases that, a little bit easier, but it's what I do all day. So
Yeah.
I work on getting people better.
I have two more questions for you before we
Yeah.
wrap up. The first one is, if someone was to get a tick bite, what
Yeah.
is the protocol they can implement in that first week immediately?
Um, well, I really think that you probably need to start antibiotics immediately. In our practice, we'll do antibiotics combined with herbs because there are some herbal formulas that have been shown to um, prevent the development of persistent infection. But often we're going to use an antibiotic if there's a high index of suspicion that tick transmitted infection.
How would you
Now,
know?
well, that's the problem. That's the problem. So here in the US, we have a number of labs where you can send the tick to get tested,
Mm,
and they will test it for the Lyme bacteria, for different species of related to Lyme. They will check Bartonella and Babesia and Ehrlichiosis and Rickettsia and a lot of different diseases. And so the best case scenario is the person has the tick and can send it to the lab. And while we're waiting for it to come back, takes 2 or 3 days, we just, maybe put them on doxycycline and some herbs. And then let's say it comes back and it's negative, right? Then we say, all right, it's unlikely you got anything. Let's leave you on some herbs just in case. Let's stop the antibiotic. Um, if it comes back and it's Borrelia or Dorferi, which is the Lyme we have in the United States, there are other Lyme cousins that you have in the UK and in Europe. Um, it may be that, yeah, if we're worried that the tick was, on a certain length of time, I would argue it doesn't need to be on very long. But if it was just like crawling on your skin, it's unlikely that it transmitted, right? But if it truly bites, whether it's 15 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, 4 hours, 72 hours,
Mm.
more, the longer it's on, the more likely it is to transmit things. But even short bites can still transmit certain organisms. So then again, we're erring on the side of caution and being pretty aggressive. I would be aggressive because I have learned over the years that even the cases we think we've picked up early was not even early enough.
Mm. Okay.
So,
All right. Excellent. Last question. How
yeah.
important is stress management, nervous system regulation, energetic work in the treatment of mast cell activation?
Like what specifically
I mean,
are
if
you
you're
thinking
really
about?
stressed and you have a dysregulated nervous system,
Hmm.
from my perspective, that it's not just the supplements and the treatments you're going to
Oh, I
do, but
see. Yeah.
how much does that play a part?
Yep. Oh no, it's a very, very important piece, and there are different ways to deal with. And I'm looking, and I mean, like, do you have a specific technique that you're looking at? So whether it's just reducing stress, whether it's limbic retraining, brain retraining, there are a number of programs out there. Whether it's working on the vagal nerve, whether it's,
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
there's loads of ways to do it. But I guess the
yeah.
question is, how important is it to
Oh,
regulate the
oh yeah,
nervous system and find ways to, manage stress and,
yeah.
calm the anxiety?
I think it's critical.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think it's a critical piece. And I'm glad you're asking about it because, right, I mean, I should have started the conversation actually, like, what do you do beyond the pharmaceutical, the supplements, right? This is
Mhm.
almost like on day one when I'm meeting a patient, I pretty much say, like, you got to start working on this. This is your homework
Yeah.
while we try to figure out the rest because it may not cure the problem completely, but if the nervous system is dysregulated, a lot of patients with mast cell activation syndrome have an overactive sympathetic nervous system. They have an overactive limbic system. Like all those pieces are just exacerbating, right? The problem.
Yeah.
And so finding the right thing for you, there are lots of different ways to manage it. Finding the right way for you to sort of calm that piece down. For some, I have definitely seen patients who have been able to come off of all their supplements and
Mhm.
drugs by just doing some programs like Primal Trust or Gupta or DNRS or so there are those like miraculous cases, but I would say for the most part, it's used in conjunction with
Yeah.
other things.
Yeah. But like you said, to start with that, in my membership program of all the modules, from everything from inner child to, shadow work and health optimization and, all of it. And there's so much nervous system regulation comes first. Cause I always say to my clients, unless your nervous system is regulated, you're operating from fight or flight, your body can't heal. All this other stuff you're going to do, it's not going to work. It's not going to take root unless your nervous system feels safe, unless your body and brain feel safe. So, yeah, I'm
That's
glad that
right.
you've that you kind of take that approach as well. This has been so insightful. I've loved it. I could ask a million
Thank
more
you.
questions, but everyone else will
Thank you.
probably get bored. But thank you so much,
No,
Dr. Dempsey. Where can people
yeah.
find you, and how can they work with you?
So, my website is drtaniadempsey.com. I have Facebook, Dr. Tania Dempsey, Instagram, Dr. Tania Dempsey MD, YouTube, I think is Tania Dempsey MD, or some combination of that. I always forget what my YouTube is. But I have a lot of content. I have my podcast, Mast Cell Matters. Go to my website and join my newsletter, and then you'll get,
Oh, your newsletter is great. I recommend everyone do that.
you.
And I will obviously put all those links in the show notes so it's easily accessible for everyone. But I love your newsletter. It's so insightful.
Oh, thank
And
you.
I'm not a fan of too many newsletters, but your newsletter is great. So highly
I
recommend
try
people
to
subscribe.
I try to like make it short and sweet, but I like to share, the things that I'm doing and putting out there in the content. I'm really, really um, very passionate about education, because the reality is that I can't see every person who's sick. So the more people I can reach, is really is my goal, right? So that's what I
Yeah.
love to put out, that content. For let's say if the patients want to work with me right now, unfortunately, I'm not taking on new patients, but I have a really amazing physician's assistant, Dr. Colin Renaud, who works with me. He's taking on patients. And of course, I've trained him and he works under me. But he's, incredible. And so people can work with him. We have Dr. Larry Afrin here, who is really, I consider, the world's expert in mast cell activation syndrome. And so if people want to work with him, he's also, he's um, incredible at getting to the root and really, really understanding mast cell activation syndrome like no one else. So we have options for people to work with us at this clinic, and then hopefully, if I can get more help, I'll be able to see more patients, myself, and that's coming hopefully
Wow.
soon. So
Amazing.
yeah,
Amazing. Well,
so
thank
that's
you
it.
so much for your time. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you. I have too. I think this is great, and maybe we have to do this again as a part two to fill in all the other
Totally. We can
questions
go
that you
deeper.
have.
Yeah, go deep. I do that often. I do that often with people. I often do part twos. And what will probably happen is a bunch of questions will come through and we can do a Q&A and then go into it like that.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Reconditioned. I am honestly so grateful to each and every person that tunes in. Thank you also for taking responsibility for your own well-being. You should know that just by choosing to listen to podcasts like this that further your well-being, you're moving more deeply into abundance consciousness. Now, don't forget, I have a bunch of free resources over at laurenvakneen.co.uk, as well as every recommendation you could ever need in regards to your well-being on the LV Recommends page, all categorized for your ease. Thank you also to our sponsors. These episodes would not be possible without them, so make sure to check them out and get some pretty awesome discounts on the show notes. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so that you can get updated each time a new one is released. Thank you. I appreciate you.